feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good, man. In the middle of my move, which you know very well because I've had to postpone recording and try to this janky setup that I got going where I probably look like garbage and there's nothing behind me and I'm on my old red couch I'm trying to sell, but I'm doing okay. Still trying to find time to watch some movies and get some reviews out because I do want to make sure that we keep putting out content while I'm moving. So this is a movie that, I missed back at Sundance, which you did watch at Sundance.
I did,
and
yeah.
Now you have rewatched now.
Yes.
But today we are reviewing Kranz, whichever way you want to say it. The guy, he's from Cabin in the Woods, which I totally
he
forgot.
plays the comedic relief, the stoner character in the film, and he's also in the short-lived series Dollhouse.
Yeah, and he's been in a bunch of stuff since, but I know him best from Cabin in the Woods, which he's great in. Mass, starring Reed Birney and Dowd, Jason Isaacs, Martha Plimpton. Eric, you've seen it twice now.
Yep.
So curious to get your thoughts. I know. What is Mass?
Yeah, so Mass is Kranz's directorial debut. He also wrote and produced the film, and it's essentially it's not based on a stage play, but it feels very much like a stage play where you take four really talented character actors, get them into one room, in this case being a church basement, and the characters that they're playing are characters that have been affected in one way or another by a tragic event. And I want to be I don't know how
you dropped out there for a sec.
Okay,
completely.
so where did I drop out at?
You dropped out right. You said church basement and a school, like a tragedy at a school, right?
Yeah. So the film takes place in a church basement where two couples come together to discuss after the wake of a tragic event and have a discussion. One couple is played by Martha Plimpton and Jason Isaacs. The other is played by Dowd and Reed Birney. Over the course of this discussion, it gets very emotionally wrought. There are topics about nature versus nurture being sort of thrown out, and who's to blame and what is considered proper in terms of having this discussion. I think that there's a lot that's kind of placed at this table, and even though all four performers are incredible, especially because it is so monologue heavy, there's just something about the film, having watched it twice, and the first time I couldn't really pinpoint why I didn't love it.
Yeah.
But part of it, I think, is that Kranz tries to wrap this thing up in a nice, tidy bow, the way that he uses this metaphorical insert shot of a bow tied to a fence. And I kind of feel that by the end of the proceedings, you come out of this movie feeling like, okay, everything has, these characters have been absolved of their quote unquote sins, and there isn't much more complexity to untangle, even though I think there is, and I think it simplifies some of that conversation that these characters are having.
It tries to put everything in the 110 minutes that these people would talk about, instead of this being probably over multiple conversations, or not everything being resolved, like you said, or forgiveness or anything like that. Where, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I actually quite liked the movie. I think for its, stagey but not showy kind of nature, where I really did like where you just put these four great actors in a room and you kind of have a really kind of interesting concept of, I don't know, it's not spoilers if we talk about like how they're involved in this, but
the Wikipedia article does give away the premise, but
yes.
In terms of the movie itself, even though it is a double entendre title, it's not revealed why they're
and it is kind
there.
of a reveal not halfway through, but
more so than 20 minutes into the movie.
just say both these sets of parents are involved some way in this tragedy, and I just kind of liked it felt like you used emotionally wrought, which I think is an apt term for the movie, but I just felt like it felt very believable, and maybe not in the sense where everything was wrapped up with not a pretty bow, but a very kind of emotional bow. I just liked that it didn't feel like overblown or sensationalized or overacted. It did feel real to me, like this conversation, both of talking about, like you said, who to blame, why this happened, trying to find a reason even though there might not be a reason, or that maybe not a reason that these couples have. But I found it very compelling throughout the whole thing, where at times, like every time I thought I'd be like, okay, this is going on a little bit too long. Like, there would be, whether it's a monologue or a topic that's brought up between these two groups that, would get me brought back in. And I felt invested in both sides. I liked having that emotionally raw conversation. Both that is very uncomfortable, but you're kind of not necessarily seeing the side of the perpetrator, but of people who obviously cared about this person. And I don't know, like I don't think that there's a lot to say in a review, because I think the direction, I think, just sits on these characters and lets them
I
kind of
disagree with that.
perform.
That's the one thing I do want to
Really?
talk about, where I think the direction in the first half of the film
Sure.
works and is very restrained, and I was almost like, oh, you know what, he's really going for just like sitting in this one location with
Yeah.
these kind of dollies in and out when
Yeah.
you have the actor giving
Because they're literally just
these
sitting at a table.
performances. Yeah, but then as soon as Jason Isaacs gets up to grab water and drinks
Right.
it
Sure, I
kind of
get what you're
starts to
saying.
change, where it does become a little bit more overt in terms of the style of filmmaking, where there's some weird sort of handheld shots as well, a little bit of shaky cam, a little bit of kind of like movement within sort of the geography of the room. That's where it felt the most stagey for me, and that's
It
where I
does
also kind of felt
definitely,
like
yeah.
it was a little bit more not only self-aware, but it kind of felt like, okay, well, I self-conscious. I need, in terms of Kranz direction, it's like, okay, I've sat with this too long. I need to give the audience something more than just, these four people sitting at the table, which I was really engaged by. And then when it kind of changes sort of the direction in that second half a little bit, where you're getting more movement and characters are kind of getting up from the table and sitting elsewhere within the room, and again, like, I understand that this could very much happen, and sort of human sort of interaction and dynamics change over the course of a conversation, but that's the stuff where I felt it was the most sort of, you could see the seams, and you could see kind of like the style of it maybe getting a little bit too ahead of itself. And then I think also the end is a little bit laid on thick with kind of the resolve of Ann Dowd's character coming back to
Yeah.
give this one monologue, even though she's very good in that.
Everyone is great, I think.
And I think my favorite of the four is Martha Plimpton, because I feel Martha Plimpton's character has the most sort of interesting arc of the
I
four
agree.
characters, where like she comes in very apprehensive to begin with, and
She
kind of
doesn't really talk much in the first half of the movie.
no, and then as the story progresses, we see, I don't necessarily think that she's forgiven what's happened, but she is more empathetic towards the parents, because part of what this movie is doing, and I think what part of what the film does quite well, is it shows you that these two parents, they're not bad people. They're
No.
average working class kind of people. Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, Reed Birney's character, the dad, who a lot of people maybe recognize him from last year in the 40-year-old version, where he played sort of the playwright who was sort of capitalizing on people of color, and sort of taking characters and sort of turning them into musical numbers and things like that, where like he's always away and kind of working at business, and maybe the mom recognized the signs but didn't really want to do more, but even though they did a lot, like they talk about seeing, you know, psychiatrists and medication and things like that, and there are plenty of reasons and explanations into it, but you can't ultimately get inside a person's head and
Yeah,
ultimately
even if
come
they're
up with
your
that reason.
kid, right?
But
Yeah.
I do like that like when you see them, they're not these monsters that have been kind of
And
portrayed in the
that's what I found
media,
the most
right?
interesting is like you're not necessarily sympathizing with this person who did a horrible thing, but I think focusing it on, you know, the family and, you know, understand that yes, the family that's grieving, both families are grieving really, and dealing with one something happening to their child, or one if their child did something that is horrible. And I think that was really interesting, and just pain in general, of how the movie kind of focuses on both side of that pain and trying to figure out together of, you know, why this happened, or you understand like one family just hating the other only for the reason that, you know, their, you know, child did something, and then that family is also on necessarily on the same side as the other one, going, we also are trying to figure out why this happened and what we did wrong, and we're dealing with that, and what we could have done better, just like you saying we should have done something better. And I found those conversations really like engaging and interesting. And like I do sort of disagree with you that I saw the staginess of it. Like I really, that exact sequence when he goes up for the water, I thought the exact thing of that feels like something on a stage play where the table's in the middle of the stage and someone gets up and they're still delivering this, you know, thing and asking people if they want water. And it did feel the most stagey at that point. But the filmmaking for me, other than those, you know, flashes to, you know, that metaphor that you're talking about, I didn't feel like, I still felt stayed true to the kind of, you know, subtleness of it in the conversation that they were having, where I never felt like it distracted from that. And I it never took me out, other than, you know, there are some smash cuts that like are in the middle of like a monologue or something that do go to that other sequence. But and then I do agree with you, like the very end, like I do feel like the movie goes on maybe a little bit too long. Like I get that, you know, if these people are meeting and it's in real time, like they're not just going to meet for an hour, and then especially with the topics of conversation that they're going over. But like a 2 hour conversation does kind of make sense. But I do feel like you do feel the length, especially at that end there, where it kind of, you know, lays it on pretty thick in that, you know, final 20 minutes or so.
And you're supposed to
um
feel the length, I think,
yeah.
intentionally to a
Oh,
certain degree,
totally.
when it
Yeah.
because it is supposed to be emotionally grueling
Yeah.
to watch, and especially once the pleasantries have been dispensed with. But the other thing I do have not problems with, but I do think that there is a certain amount of creative license that Kranz is given, because it's not based on any real event,
It's
that
just
it's
a
almost kind of
bunch of
like
them.
a
Yeah.
blanket statement, kind of cathartic kind of experience, that it's like, okay, well, what would this be like, speculatively speaking, of how, you know, this would be set up. And because it's not based on a specific event, it's almost like where, you know, in films where you have characters that have mental illnesses or disabilities and you don't specify exactly what they are, you
It's
can
just
kind of
mental
get away
illness.
with the
Yeah.
symptoms more so than
Yeah.
anything else, or exaggerate the characters more, so you don't have to be specific. Where it's the same thing here, where it's like, okay, it's not based on any one event, but it is saying something about, you know, what has been
All of
going
them.
on in the
Yeah.
US specifically over the last 2 decades now, you know, starting with, you know, a certain um event that kind of sparked a real sort of attention to
Yeah.
uh, this kind of violence, and how people are able to access certain things, and also, you know, where were the warning signs, and having those conversations. So it does take those liberties there, I think, a little bit as well, when it comes to not being based on any one thing. It's
I think
kind
you
of just
kind of
like,
need to do that with this though.
I
Like
know that, I know that,
yeah.
and I just feel it's like, okay, well, you know, we're not beholden to anything, and we
Yeah.
can kind of just create these characters and this dialogue in this situation, and we don't have to worry about if anything is truly accurate to how these
Yeah.
people would interact, and that gives us more you know, freedom and creative license to play with that. And sometimes it just kind of feels like, again, it's a blanket statement on
I
what is
agree.
being said and what is going on, because yeah, you can talk about grief and trauma and how people deal with loss, but it almost doesn't feel specific. It kind of just feels like, okay, these are two sets of characters that are interacting, being on opposing sides of the thing, but they're having this meeting, and it just at moments kind of feels like they're able to say or do whatever they want based on it not being sort of completely and honestly sort of truthful to an event. It's just events that have transpired over a period of
Yeah,
time.
I'm almost I almost like that or don't mind it because I
But you
feel
know what I'm
like it's
saying, right?
I do. Yeah, yeah. No, I get what you're saying and I understand where you're coming from, but for me personally, I feel like it's something that's happened so often that I feel like you kind of can take that I feel like that's the best way to do it in this kind of movie. And I don't mind how the movie even, kind of tells you the story of what happened through their conversations.
Oh,
And
I don't mind that.
it
And I
feels
like the
organic,
idea that
but
there's no media, or there's no, like, there is kind of the setup of this lawyer kind of being
yeah,
the mediator and sort of setting things up and getting ready, and you have two people working at the church who are kind of, I guess, a little bit comedic relief in sort
but
of
they
the
just, cause
opening.
they just, it's just not an awkward situation, but an
But they know what's
uncomfortable
coming, and they're
situation.
more
Yeah.
aware of what's coming than the audience is when you're first watching it. But again, the double entendre title kind of sums up
Yeah.
what
But I
the
think a lot of
movie
people will go
is.
in not knowing what the
Yeah.
movie's about, right? And that's why I don't want to say too much because, like, I do feel like the movie does a good job of laying out the events, even though it is kind of an amalgamation of everything that's been happening with violence in the United States and stuff like that. That maybe I see where you're saying where it could have maybe taken a stronger stance if it picked one kind of thing and really focused on it. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of them are so similar that you can kind of just get it based on how the story kind of portrays those events. And yeah, I don't know, I thought Emotionally Wrought was the perfect way of putting it at the beginning, Eric. And I thought the performances were so good that it kept me engaged the entire time. I like how the events kind of are portrayed through these conversations, and it all felt very organic and real and never felt sensationalized or exploited or anything like that, where it felt like a genuine conversation between these two families. And um, I really liked it because of that. And it doesn't feel showy or flashy to me. Like it does really just focus on this conversation. And I welcomed that. And I actually liked it quite a bit because of it.
Yeah, I mean, like, in terms of the performances, like, it's nice to see, like, Jason Isaacs, who is usually memorable in supporting turns in more recently a movie like The Death of Stalin, but he's also done a lot of villain work in sort of genre movies, or historical epics that are kind of fictionalized, whether it be A Cure for Wellness or The Patriot. And then you have Ann Dowd, who ever since Compliance has been kind of a big kind of character actor that people have been really always excited to see. I mean, you just watching The Leftovers, I mean, she's
Yeah.
amazing on that as well. And it's always great to see her pop up and stuff, and she's given a great role here. And then Martha Plimpton, who's been working forever, as a child actor in The Goonies, and her career taking sort of different reinventions, becoming a sitcom actor in that one show with Garrett Hedlund in the mid 2000s. And now she's given this really powerful, thoughtful, complex kind of role, and kind of showcases another great kind of side to her, as an actor. And then Reed Birney's a guy who kind of is part of the reason why this whole movie kind of went into production, because Kranz worked with him on a stage production and wanted to write something for him, for a movie, and sort of like showcase this actor in terms of what he can do
Mm-hmm.
as a performance. And he was actually just recently cast in the Anya Taylor-Joy, Ray Fiennes cannibal movie, The Menu.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's, again, like, all four of these actors, like, anytime they usually pop up in anything else, they're always kind of a welcome presence. But then when you get all
Totally.
four of them in the room together, and they're essentially all co-leads having this conversation. That's the one thing I can't criticize, is that I think all 4 actors are truly great and bring not only an intensity to their roles, but a thoughtfulness. And it feels like they're not just memorizing these very long, drawn out, monologues, that they're actually having a dialogue with one another.
I agree completely. Reed Birney won a Tony Award for
The
best
Humans.
Which
He played the Richard Jenkins role.
Yeah, which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense to me, which I think is great. The Humans, another very, based on actual stage play, similar to this, a long conversation, not necessarily the subject matter, but
it's still, but they're also, I would say, even though it's not, Mass is not a genre movie, nor is it a horror film, but it is horrific to think about what these couples are talking about and what they've gone through. And
absolutely,
that's also kind of interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. I ended up, I really, really do like the movie. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I think it's quite good.
I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I like the movie, but I still have some caveats and hangups when it comes to some of the direction and some of the writing overall. But again, the performances are all good, and the movie is worth checking out, whether you see it in theaters, which it's currently playing in, or when it's available on VOD or premium VOD, which I'm sure will be in a month or so from now. But it's definitely a conversation starter, and one that I don't think anybody will come out of being like, oh, those performances were hollow. Like this is an actor's movie through and through.
Absolutely. Thank you all for watching or listening. We really, really do appreciate it. Once again, I'm in the process of a move, so our content will be a little bit sporadic over the next week or so. My move is coming up in a couple days, so that's why I have this weird setup. Like I mentioned, I might have a little bit of a weird setup for the next couple weeks, but we will figure it out. Please go subscribe over on our YouTube channel. Just search for Untitled Movie Podcast, and we should pop up there. It'll be Untitled with our logo and everything that you guys can go over and subscribe to. Podcast services, Untitled Movie Reviews, Untitled Movie Conversations, Untitled Movie Podcast. Please go subscribe to those feeds, whatever you like. We have stuff coming up on all of those channels. We're kind of doing the bi-weekly format for the main podcast right now because of my move. We will get back to a weekly format. We are going to put out a conversation at some point about DC fandom. Once Eric and I can kind of get our schedules together, he's got to do some cinema scene stuff. So we might, it'll be out soon. Keep an eye out for that on YouTube and podcast services. We also have a review up for Halloween Kills, which you guys can go check out on YouTube and podcast services. And we'll have stuff like the Eternals and tons of stuff over the Wes Anderson's French Dispatch, as well as other stuff. So I promise, even with moving, we will have stuff for you guys. So we really do appreciate all of you. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews at RogersTV.com/CinemaScene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Good work, Franz.